In this video, I want to talk about the Quervains Tenosynovitis. What is it? How you might be told to treat it, but importantly, the one thing that you might be missing that you need to correct in order to properly get rid of this. So stay tuned. Thanks for checking out the channel. My name's John. I'm the head therapist here at John W Sports Injury. Here at this channel, we want to do three simple things. Help you to understand your body so that you can get rid of any pain, weaknesses or injury so you can ultimately go and smash your personal exercise, health, wellness goals. So if that sounds like the type of stuff you want to be watching, do me a favour and hit that subscribe button, then the bell, because I'll keep you updated on any videos with tips and tricks like that we keep updated. But we want to be talking today about a condition called the Quervains Tenosynovitis. So first of all, what is this? Well, it's a pain that is typically experienced around the thumb joint or around the base of the thumb joint, potentially up into the forearm as well. And this comes about because of an inflammation of the tendons that run through there. It's quite a complex area running through here where we have tendons, we have structures holding down those tendons and various other things. So what can happen is that we get some inflammation of those tendon sheaths and it can be very, very uncomfortable. We typically see this in people that might have desk jobs where they're doing a lot of typing or mouse work, in racket sports players where they're using a lot of wrist movements, or in somebody who's perhaps weightlifting or lifting heavy weights as part of that exercise regime. Now, typical measures in order to improve this are around things like anti-inflammatory responses to the area, so that might be ice or NSAID medication. We can also see the advice to use something like a splint to immobilize the area, or potentially it can even lead to using things like steroids, a massive anti-inflammatory into the area. Now, all of those things potentially have some merit. Again, when it comes to things like steroid injections, they should always be a last port of call. But essentially, getting some anti-inflammatory into an inflammatory condition makes some sense. So all of these things I would agree with, but I think we miss a huge trick. And a lot of people that I see in clinic, I think have missed the crucial thing that we need to do, which is to actually correct the cause. Something that I feel very passionately about when resolving injury is that we must trace back from the injury and find the actual cause. I often liken fixing an injury to like fixing a leak. If we have a leaky roof, we can just plug that leak. We can put something over it and that will help in a very short-term temporary way. If we want to stop that leak for that second, then we can do that. But we know that if the rain returns or over a period of time, that leak will come back. So what do we need to do? We need to find that leak and ultimately trace it back to find the source. And that's what we need to do in injury, and in particular with the Quervains Tenosynovitis. So what do I mean by this? Well, we know that there's an inflammatory response happening at the thumb. So we know that it's an inflammatory response around a tendon. Well, tendons attach muscles to bone, so their role is to physically attach a muscle to a bone so a muscle can act on that joint in order to create movement. So what we need to do, if this inflammatory response is happening in the connecting structure, we need to know what's pulling on that structure, what's creating force on that structure that's resulting in this inflammation. So what we need to do is find the cause. And in something like tenosynovitis of the Quervains, is what we need to be finding out is actually somewhere in the forearm directly can be a problem. It can be problems related right the way back up to the shoulder. But what we want to do is we want to address these forearms. And I do this in three ways that I call to desensitize, to stretch and to strengthen. And I'm going to talk through those three methods of what you need to be doing now. So firstly, when it comes to desensitizing, what we might like to do is just look and feel around the tissue. And you might find that there's some really sore areas, what might be termed knots or trigger points in those muscles. So we want to be calming those down. And this is where some of our trusty friends can come in. So for example, something like a massage gun can work really well. So when we take that massage gun, what we want to be doing is looking around those forearm areas, working the massage gun around those areas and just looking for any sore points. And bearing in mind that these muscles run right the way up towards the elbow. So we want to look throughout the forearm, and if we find a sensitive area, just hold on that sensitive area until we feel that start to desensitize. We can do the same on the top as well, looking through, but bear in mind with the condition running towards the thumb, They're the particular areas that we want to be looking into. Another thing we can use is something like a lacrosse ball, something that I always keep on my desk. And what we can do is apply that lacrosse ball to our desk and then look to roll through that area, looking for the same thing, trying to find those sore areas, holding on those, doing these small micro movements in order to roll out that tissue and desensitize it. The next thing we want to do is we want to be stretching out that tissue. So again, we want to be stretching out those forearms. Now, the way we would typically do that is hold the arm out in front of us and pull those fingers back. You'll notice that my elbow's locked out and I'm pulling that wrist down. What I would encourage you to do is actually do this in the side that isn't suffering, first of all, and then compare it to the other side. When you get into the problematic side, do you feel that tightness in that area? Does it become more uncomfortable? That's a sign that this is an area that we need to address. A reminder that static stretches we're looking to hold for 30 seconds. And again, we can work this underside of the forearm and then the top part by simply turning the arm over and pulling the wrist in the other way. So we're 30 seconds holding that stretch there and then 30 seconds holding that stretch. Doing this on both sides. And that's something that can be repeated daily till you start to feel that tissue improving the flexibility in the area, and hopefully you're starting to notice a reduction in your symptoms. So finally, what we want to be doing is looking to strengthen this area. And for me, this always comes as the last port of call. I always want to make sure I spend some time in the early stages when things are particularly acute and sore, working into the desensitizing and the stretching phase. But once you've felt those improvements, once you've felt your symptoms settle, you can then take something like a small light weight. And what we want to be doing is working the wrist into different directions. So the first thing that we might like to do, or the directions that we want to be working in, are what we call flexion and extension, so working the wrist up and down. Then we can also be looking to work in a rotational direction, so taking the arm through what we might term pronation and supination. And then in the case of the Quervains, what we want to be doing is working the wrist up and down, really looking to just test that wrist in lots of different directions. But before you dive into these exercises, the first thing that you should look to do is to take some of the weight out of the forearm. We can do that by placing our arm over something like a table, resting your arm on the edge of a table or a desk and going through those movements. So firstly, taking the wrist through a up and down movement. And I would encourage you again to do this on your good side first and then your bad side. And in comparing the differences, does one feel more difficult than the other? Does one fatigue quicker than the other? I would only encourage starting with about 3 sets of 6 reps on each side. Once we've done the flexion and extension, we can then repeat those exercises for rotation. Again, looking to take the dumbbell through 6 rotations on each side. And then finally, that what we term ulnar and radial deviation. Now, this is possibly going to be the most tricky movement because of the sheer nature of how the Quervains might become aggravated, but comparing the good and the bad side. So there we have it. If you're someone who's suffering with the Quervains, if you're not sure if you're suffering with the Quervains, a quick test that you can do is by taking your hand out in front of you, locking your thumb into your hand, gripping the fingers around the thumb, and then start to turn that wrist in that direction, pulling the thumb away if you like. And if you feel a pain through that area, that is an indicator potentially that we might be suffering with the Quervains. It is something that you might want to get looked into quite quickly. We want to be catching this as quick as we can, finding out your true cause. And I do agree with some of the earlier advice that I gave around anti-inflammatories, potentially even splinting if the condition is particularly acute. But what I would encourage you to do is to really find out your cause and get onto that cause in order to fully get rid of the injury and fully make sure it doesn't come back. Has that been helpful? If you've enjoyed this video, if this is the type of content you want to be seeing, do me a favor and hit that like button so I know this is the type of thing you want to be seeing. And as I mentioned at the start, if you haven't subscribed, hit that subscribe, hit that bell notification, because I'm going to keep you updated on our next video. And here's some more content from me that you might find interesting.